Judge Franklin Pierce sat in his grand, wood-paneled office, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the shelves lined with legal volumes and awards. His fingers drummed impatiently on the polished desk as he reviewed the files of the day's upcoming cases. One file caught his eye, a complaint filed by a local woman named Emma Lawson. She was a high school literature teacher from the nearby town, and she had recently spoken out publicly against one of his controversial rulings. A ruling that had redirected public school funds to a private real estate development favored by some influential business partners of the judge. Pierce's lips curled into a thin smile. This was his chance. Emma Lawson had made the mistake of publicly challenging his decision at a town hall meeting. She had questioned the fairness of diverting money promised for education to private interests. The judge's pride was wounded, and he was determined to silence her. His plan was simple: summon her to his courtroom, intimidate her, and make an example out of her. It would serve as a warning to anyone else who dared question his authority. Across town, in a modest classroom filled with the gentle hum of youthful energy, Emma Lawson stood in front of her students, a calm presence in the midst of the morning bustle. She wore a soft burgundy sweater, her blonde hair loosely tucked behind one ear. She was writing the phrase, "symbolism in modern literature," across the whiteboard in neat, careful handwriting. Her classroom was her sanctuary, filled with books, posters of famous authors, and the hopeful faces of teenagers eager to understand the world beyond their textbooks. Emma's passion was teaching. For 10 years, she had dedicated herself to helping students not just pass exams, but truly grasp the deeper meanings in literature, the stories behind the stories. She believed books were windows into human nature, justice, and truth. As she glanced around, she noticed a mixture of enthusiasm and restlessness in her students. Some were deeply engaged, scribbling notes and raising thoughtful questions, while others were clearly counting down the minutes until lunch. From the back row, a young boy named Jeremy raised his hand hesitantly. "Miss Lawson, why do we have to analyze symbolism? Can't we just enjoy the story for what it is?" Emma smiled warmly and walked over to his desk. "That's actually a very important question, Jeremy," she said softly. "Symbolism isn't just about finding hidden meanings. It's about understanding the world in new ways. When we look deeper into stories, we see reflections of real life, the struggles people face, the justice they seek, the hope they hold on to. Literature helps us understand more than just the story. It helps us understand each other and ourselves." The bell rang sharply, breaking the quiet. Students began packing up their belongings, chatting about their plans for lunch. As the last few students filed out, Emma noticed a copy of the school newspaper lying on a desk. The headline on the front page caught her eye. "Local Judge's Controversial Decision Slashes School Funding." Her heart sank slightly. She remembered the town hall meeting last month, where she had stood up in front of the community and voiced her concerns. She had spoken not as a teacher alone, but as a citizen who cared deeply about the future of her students. Later that afternoon in the teacher's lounge, Emma sat quietly sipping her coffee. Her colleague Diane approached, lowering her voice. "Emma, I heard what you said at the meeting. You really stirred things up." Emma shrugged, a little tired but resolute. "I only spoke the truth, Diane. The judge's ruling was technically legal, but morally it's wrong. Those funds were promised to our schools, to our kids." Diane shook her head with a worried expression. "You have no idea how many powerful people Pierce has on his side. Be careful. Sometimes speaking up comes with a cost." Emma smiled softly. "I'm not afraid. I became a teacher to make a difference. If I stay silent when things are wrong, then I'm part of the problem." What no one at Westridge High knew was that Emma's past was far from ordinary. Before becoming a teacher, she had graduated at the top of her law school class. She had worked for years in legal aid, fighting quietly but fiercely for those who had no voice. But after witnessing the toll the courtroom took on her spirit, she had turned to teaching as a way to inspire the next generation. Now, as she prepared for the next day's lesson, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that her quiet life was about to be upended. Judge Franklin Pierce was about to call her to court, but she wasn't the helpless woman he thought she was. Beneath her gentle exterior was a sharp legal mind and an unbreakable spirit. The fight for justice she had once faced in the courtroom was far from over. It was just beginning. Judge Franklin Pierce's summons to Emma Lawson arrived on a crisp Monday morning, delivered by a court officer with a stern expression. The letter, formal and uncompromising, requested her presence for a hearing regarding allegations of contempt and defamation against the court, charges that seemed as fabricated as they were intimidating. Emma held the letter carefully, her heart steady but her mind sharp. She understood the judge's true motive, to silence her voice and intimidate the community into submission. Yet beneath her calm exterior, a fire of determination burned bright. Emma's days at Westridge High continued with their usual rhythm, but the summons cast a shadow over her thoughts. She continued teaching with the same passion, guiding her students through the complexities of literature, weaving in lessons of justice and courage whenever she could. To her, the classroom was more than a place for reading stories. It was a sanctuary where young minds could learn to see the world with clarity and compassion. Yet, beneath the surface, Emma was preparing for a battle much larger than any exam. As the hearing date approached, whispers began circulating through the school and town. Some admired Emma's courage, while others warned her to tread carefully. The judge's influence ran deep, and many feared the consequences of defying him. Emma's colleagues offered quiet support, but even they understood the gravity of what she faced. Despite the growing tension, Emma remained focused, drawing strength from her convictions and the knowledge that truth was on her side. On the morning of the hearing, Emma arrived at the courthouse dressed simply but with quiet dignity. The building, imposing and cold, stood as a symbol of the very system she was about to challenge. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with an undercurrent of expectation. Judge Pierce sat at the bench, his eyes cold and calculating. He seemed ready to crush any opposition, confident that Emma's humble background would make her an easy target. But Emma was no ordinary woman. As the proceedings began, it became clear that she was prepared. When the judge accused her of contempt, she responded not with fear but with reasoned arguments, calmly dismantling the unfounded claims against her. Her voice, steady and clear, echoed through the courtroom, capturing the attention of everyone present. Witnesses were called, and Emma presented evidence of the judge's questionable ruling and its impact on the community's children. Outside the courtroom, a small crowd had gathered, their faces a mix of hope and apprehension. News of the hearing had spread, inspiring those who believed in justice to stand with Emma in spirit. Social media buzzed with messages of support, and local newspapers began to question the judge's motives. Emma's courage was igniting a spark in the community, reminding everyone that even the simplest voice could challenge the most powerful. Back inside, the judge grew visibly frustrated. His attempts to dismiss Emma's arguments were met with unwavering resolve. She spoke not only as a teacher but as a defender of the truth, a beacon of integrity in a place often clouded by corruption. The courtroom, once hostile, began to shift as her words resonated with those listening. By the end of the day, it was clear that Emma had not only defended herself but had exposed cracks in the system. Judge Pierce's attempts to frame her were unraveling, and a new narrative was taking shape, one of resilience, courage, and the power of standing up for what is right. As Emma left the courthouse, the crowd applauded quietly, their support a silent promise that she was not alone. She knew the battle was far from over, but she also knew that the truth, once spoken, could never be silenced. Her journey was just beginning, and with every step, she carried the hopes of those who believed in justice and the promise of a better future. That night, Emma sat by the window of her small apartment, the city lights twinkling in the distance. She thought about the students waiting for her back at school, the community watching her fight, and the challenge ahead. But her heart was steady. She had faced the judge's power and emerged stronger. Whatever lay ahead, Emma Lawson was ready to meet it head-on, armed with nothing but truth, courage, and an unbreakable spirit. Emma's victory in the courtroom sent ripples through the small town of Westridge, but the battle was far from over. Judge Franklin Pierce, humiliated and frustrated, was determined to regain control, and crush the woman who had dared to expose him. Behind the scenes, whispers of retaliation grew louder. Yet Emma remained unshaken, fueled by a sense of justice that went beyond herself. Back in her classroom, the walls lined with books and quiet encouragement, Emma found renewed purpose. Her students noticed a different glow in her eyes. Not just a teacher sharing knowledge, but a warrior standing for what was right. They sensed the weight of her struggle, but also the power it gave her. Emma made it clear that courage wasn't just for adults in courtrooms. It belonged to anyone who stood up for truth. The judge's attempts to discredit Emma in the media only backfired. Community members began organizing, rallying behind her cause. Teachers, parents, and students voiced their support for fair education, funding, shining light on the shadows Pierce had tried to hide behind. Social media platforms filled with stories of injustice and hope, connecting people who had felt powerless to a collective voice. Emma's legal background became her greatest weapon. She began researching, gathering evidence not only to defend herself, but to challenge the broader corruption that threatened her community. Late nights were spent poring over documents, speaking with whistleblowers, and consulting with trusted allies in the legal field. Every detail mattered. Every piece of information was a step toward exposing the truth. The judge's influence, though still strong, was visibly weakening. His allies started distancing themselves, unsure if the tide was turning. Emma's courage had inspired a movement, proving that even one person could make a difference when armed with knowledge and conviction. The fight was no longer just about her. It was about justice for the children who deserved better schools, for teachers striving to make a difference, and for a community hungry for honesty. One afternoon, as Emma prepared her lesson plans, she received a call from an unexpected source, a senior lawyer who had once worked in the same courthouse and admired her quiet strength. He offered guidance and promised to help her navigate the complexities ahead. This support rekindled Emma's hope, reminding her that she was never truly alone in the fight for what was right. The days that followed brought new challenges. Legal battles escalated, the judge's attempts to intimidate continued, and pressure mounted. But Emma's resolve only grew stronger. She remembered why she had chosen this path, to protect those who could not protect themselves and to fight for a future where truth triumphed over power. Her story spread beyond Westridge, touching hearts in nearby towns and cities. Letters of encouragement arrived, and strangers reached out with stories of their own struggles against injustice. Emma realized her fight was part of a much larger battle for fairness and dignity everywhere. In the quiet moments, when the noise faded, Emma reflected on the journey so far. She thought of her students, the community, and the hope she carried. No matter the obstacles, she vowed to keep standing, to keep fighting, and to keep believing in the power of one voice to change the world. The road ahead was uncertain, but Emma Lawson faced it with courage and grace. She was no longer just a simple teacher. She was a symbol of resilience, a beacon of hope, and a reminder that true strength comes from standing up for what is right, even when the odds seem impossible. Emma felt the weight of the mounting pressure each day, yet her spirit remained unyielding. The courtroom battles with Judge Pierce were no longer just legal skirmishes. They had become a fight for the soul of Westridge itself. Emma knew that winning this fight would mean more than a personal victory. It would restore hope for an entire community that had suffered in silence for too long. Her mornings began early, balancing the demands of teaching with the relentless work of gathering evidence and preparing legal responses. In her classroom, she continued to inspire her students, weaving lessons of justice and resilience into her literature classes. Her students were no longer passive listeners. They became her allies, absorbing the courage she exuded and learning that speaking up was a powerful act. Outside school, Emma's support network grew stronger. Parents, teachers, and local activists organized meetings to discuss the judge's misuse of power and the consequences of his rulings. The community's energy was palpable, as people who had felt powerless began to find their voices. Emma was humbled and energized by this wave of solidarity. She realized that the fight was bigger than herself. It was a movement fueled by collective hope and determination. One afternoon, as Emma sat in a crowded town hall meeting, she listened intently as community members shared their stories. Parents worried about their children's future, teachers struggling to maintain resources, and students anxious about their education. Each story was a testament to the impact of corruption and the urgent need for change. Emma spoke last, her voice steady and passionate, urging everyone to keep fighting and never settle for injustice. Meanwhile, Judge Pierce's tactics grew more desperate. Rumors of him attempting to manipulate local officials and silence dissent began to surface. But these attempts only strengthened the resolve of those standing with Emma. She and her legal allies worked tirelessly to expose these maneuvers, ensuring that truth would prevail over deceit. Emma's legal expertise shone brightly during these dark days. She drafted clear, compelling arguments and coordinated with investigative journalists eager to reveal the judge's wrongdoing. Her knowledge of the law was a shield and a sword, protecting her and striking down false accusations. Though the courtroom often felt like a battlefield, Emma's calm intellect and unshakable integrity won respect from many who witnessed her fight. Late at night, after long days filled with courtroom drama and community organizing, Emma often found solace. In the quiet moments at home, she reflected on how far she had come, from a simple literature teacher to a symbol of courage and justice. Despite the hardships, she felt a profound sense of purpose. The sacrifices were worth it because her fight meant a better future for her students and the entire town. Her relationship with her students deepened during this time. Many expressed admiration and gratitude, telling her how her bravery inspired them to stand up for their own beliefs. Emma encouraged them to be thoughtful, compassionate, and fearless, qualities that had carried her through the toughest trials. The tide began to turn as mounting evidence and community pressure forced higher authorities to intervene. Investigations into Judge Pierce's conduct were launched and the courtroom's atmosphere shifted. Emma's perseverance had cracked the once impenetrable walls of corruption. Though challenges remained, the sense of victory was no longer distant. It was within reach. Emma knew the road ahead was still long and uncertain, but the journey had already transformed her and her community, from fear to hope, from silence to action. Emma Lawson's story was a powerful reminder that change begins with courage and a refusal to accept injustice. With renewed determination, Emma prepared for the next phase of the battle, knowing that her strength was not just in the law but in the hearts of those who believed alongside her. Her fight was a beacon, proof that even the simplest voice could echo loudly enough to change the course of many lives. Emma stood at the crossroads of her journey, the courtroom battles behind her transforming into a broader quest for justice that reached far beyond Westridge. The investigation into Judge Pierce's conduct had opened a floodgate, exposing a tangled web of corruption and abuse of power that many had feared but dared not confront. Emma's quiet determination had become a rallying point, inspiring others to speak out and demand accountability. With the town's attention fixed on the unfolding revelations, Emma found herself not only a teacher and a legal advocate, but a leader in a movement for change. She organized community forums where citizens could share their experiences and fears, turning pain into collective strength. These gatherings were filled with stories of lost opportunities, broken promises, and the long shadow cast by those who had wielded authority without conscience. Despite the growing support, Emma knew that the path forward was fraught with challenges. Powerful interests resisted change, and the fight for transparency was met with intimidation tactics designed to silence dissent. Yet Emma's resolve never wavered. She leaned on the foundation of truth and integrity she had built, understanding that real change required patience, persistence, and the courage to face adversity head-on. In her classroom, Emma continued to nurture the next generation, instilling in her students the values of critical thinking and empathy. Her lessons took on new meaning as she wove real-life examples of resilience and justice into the curriculum. Students who once questioned the relevance of literature now saw it as a mirror reflecting society's struggles and triumphs. Emma encouraged them to see themselves as agents of change, capable of shaping a better world. Meanwhile, Emma worked closely with legal experts and activists to draft proposals for systemic reforms aimed at preventing future abuses of power. These proposals called for greater transparency in judicial decisions, protections for whistleblowers, and increased community oversight. Emma's unique perspective as both a teacher and a legal mind gave her insights that resonated deeply with policymakers and citizens alike. As media coverage intensified, Emma became a symbol of hope and integrity, appearing on panels and in interviews to share her story and advocate for justice. Her message was clear: no one is above the law and every voice matters. She used her platform not for personal gain, but to amplify the struggles of those who had been marginalized and ignored. Throughout this period, Emma faced personal sacrifices. The constant scrutiny took a toll on her privacy and well-being, but she found strength in the unwavering support of her family, friends, and community. Their belief in her mission reminded her that her fight was not in vain. One pivotal moment came when a respected judge from a neighboring district publicly called for Judge Pierce's resignation, citing the evidence gathered through Emma's efforts. This declaration sent shockwaves through the legal community and further empowered the movement for accountability. Emma's journey was a testament to the transformative power of courage and conviction. From a simple literature teacher to a champion for justice, she embodied the idea that true strength lies not in status or power, but in the willingness to stand up for what is right. As the investigation progressed and reforms took shape, Emma looked toward the future with cautious optimism. The road ahead would still require vigilance and effort, but the seeds of change had been planted. Her story, once just a quiet act of defiance, had blossomed into a legacy of hope and empowerment. In the quiet moments between battles, Emma often reflected on the students who inspired her daily. Their curiosity, resilience, and passion fueled her drive to create a better world not just for them but for generations to come. Emma Lawson had proven that even the most unexpected voices could rise above adversity and rewrite the story of their community. The day of the final hearing arrived with an air of gravity that wrapped around the courthouse like a silent storm. Emma stood outside watching as a line of townspeople filed in. Faces she had come to know over the past months, parents, students, fellow teachers, local shopkeepers, each carried with them a quiet determination. This wasn't just a hearing anymore. It had become a turning point for an entire town that had learned to hope again. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with restrained anticipation. The bench was now occupied by a state-appointed judge sent to oversee the proceedings involving Judge Pierce, who sat across the room no longer cloaked in his once unquestioned authority. Emma could see the strain in his expression. His shoulders, which once carried the weight of unchecked control, now sagged under the reality of accountability. Emma took her seat, her hands resting calmly in her lap. She had walked this path with unwavering resolve, but today felt different. It wasn't just about the legal arguments anymore. It was about the message this moment would send to every child who had sat in her classroom, to every citizen who had been told their voice didn't matter. As the proceedings began, Emma's legal ally, a young and fiercely intelligent attorney named Maya Chen, presented the final evidence. It was a meticulously constructed narrative of manipulation and misconduct, backed by documents, recordings, and testimonies gathered over months. What once had been whispered suspicions was now undeniable fact. But it wasn't the documents alone that swayed the room. It was the human stories. A teacher who couldn't get funding for textbooks, a mother who had to pull her child out of a scholarship program after funds were reallocated, a student whose dreams of college faded when resources dried up. One by one they stood, voices steady, their words heavy with truth. Emma was called to the stand last. She spoke not just of law, but of purpose, of the responsibility each of us has to stand for what is right, even when it means standing alone. Her voice never wavered as she recounted her journey. From a literature teacher who questioned a ruling to a woman who found herself holding up a mirror to a broken system. Across the room, reporters scribbled notes. Cameras clicked silently. But Emma wasn't speaking for them. She was speaking for the girl in her class who once asked if being honest was still worth it. For the boy who said he wanted to be a lawyer to make things fair. For the colleagues who had doubted that a single voice could make change. For all of them, she spoke. When the presiding judge finally addressed the court, the silence was absolute. He acknowledged the depth of the investigation and the courage of those who had brought the truth forward. Judge Pierce was to be removed from his position effective immediately, and a full ethics inquiry would follow. A slow, quiet wave of relief swept through the courtroom. Emma closed her eyes briefly. Not in triumph, but in gratitude. It was over, but also, it was just beginning. Outside the courthouse, the town gathered. A student held up a sign that read, "Truth has a voice." Emma smiled. She didn't need applause. She didn't need titles or recognition. What mattered was that the truth had finally been heard, and justice had finally stepped out from behind the curtain. In the weeks that followed, Westridge began to heal. Educational funding was restored, and community leaders worked alongside educators to rebuild trust and programs that had been lost. Emma returned to her classroom not as a hero, but as the teacher she had always been. Only now with more hearts listening, more eyes open. Her students carried themselves differently. They asked deeper questions, spoke with conviction, and leaned into the lessons Emma knew mattered most, not just about literature, but about life. About how one person can face the impossible and still make a difference. And late one evening, as the autumn light spilled across her desk, Emma picked up her pen and began writing a new lesson plan. At the top, she scrawled 4 simple words. Stories can change everything, because they had, and she had lived to prove it.